Hello, this is Stephen Nojiri with another Tada Genji Traditions video. Now this video is going to be a little bit different than the usual historical explanations or rundown videos. This is going to seem like a religious or philosophical video at first, but I encourage you to pay attention and watch because there's some very important points that I'm trying to make in this video. So in this video, we will look at a spectrum of belief involving the deification of deceased persons. We are going to look at three different types of persons. There is going to be designated the forensic person, the historical person, and the deification or the deity. We're going to look at the interrelationships of these three, and we will look at how people could have interpreted or chosen to believe how these three interrelate. And that would be based on the predominant belief system and the time period of the individual in question. Finally, we're going to establish that you cannot explain complicated spiritual culture with overly simple generalizations. Now, usually in videos, I also try to go into great detail, but in this video, I'm going to try something different. I'm going to try to hit the main points clearly, succinctly, but not go off in a lot of detail. We'll see if it works. So again, let's be very clear. This topic relates to the deification of deceased persons, whether they were famous people or family members, for example, great-grandparents, or possibly like Toyotomi Hideyoshi. But in order to do this, we're going to use a model which establishes three different persons when we are discussing the deification of a person. So here we go. So the first person is the forensic person. And for the rest of this video, in this model, whenever I say the forensic person, I'm talking about a mind born into flesh and blood body. Okay, this is the person who was alive and walking around and interacting. Now you may be tempted to call this the historical person, but we're not going to use that designation because you will see that historical person is going to refer to the generic thought form that exists in our minds and in our culture that is based on the memories and the records of the flesh and blood human. So there is a specific difference between the historical person, who is just a memory, just a thought, a concept in the minds of people, and the forensic person, who is the actual flesh and blood human being. The third designation is the deity. And the deity is essentially an extension of the historical person in that they are the thought or the concept of a person. But this is when the thought form, the mental image, becomes deified. This is when the deity is able to inspire and motivate us toward action. So now let me put a chart up and explain this a little bit more. So on the chart you can see in red, yellow, and orange. So red, the forensic person. This is the actual human being who lived and died. This person is tied to a specific place and a specific time, and this person cannot be interacted with unless you crossed paths with them in that specific place and time. In other words, they're born here, they die here, and unless you were alive when they were alive and interacted with them, you cannot interact with them. Next is the historical person, and now you can hopefully you can see why I'm making the distinction historical, forensic, what I'm actually trying to distinguish here. Historical person, this is not the flesh and blood human being. The flesh and blood human being is forensic person. Historical person is a mental image, a thought form, a concept that we build in our minds and collective memories. Or we build this image in our culture. It's not the real person, but rather it's a collection of facts, a collection of ideas, a collection of memories, a collection of records that assembles to create the quote-unquote idea of the person. This idea of the person can be interacted with throughout space and time because it is a concept, is an idea. Now, moving across the spectrum further, we get the deity. And the deity is when the mental image is so inspiring that it actually moves us to action, moves us to feeling, moves us emotionally. when we feel tied to it in a profound way, then the thought form, the mental image becomes deified, and this deity inspires us. But it's possible that it's nothing more than our own projection. And so you'll be tempted to ask, I know a lot of you instantly ask this question, but don't the Japanese believe that the deity is the soul or the mind of the historical person that has ascended to godhood? And so you've made two critical errors instantly by asking this question. The first error, you cannot say that the Japanese believe. Okay, that's an impossible thing. It's an impossible statement. There's just simply too many different belief systems, now and historically, to try to summarize all of Japanese belief into an oversimplified statement. So in short, no, not all Japanese believe that any particular belief system, right? Japan now and in history has been a collection of various and multiple religious beliefs and explanations. Japanese Buddhism, Shinto, and Confucianism all had various schools which all had variations in their beliefs and variations in their view. So no, not all, you can't say Japanese people believe this because, again, way too many different beliefs and variations existed now and historically for you to say such an erroneous statement. The second error that you've committed is that you are again utilizing the term historical person when you actually meant to say the forensic person. Remember, forensic person in this model is the flesh and blood human being who lived and died in a particular space-time. When you say historical person, we are talking about the idea of the person, the concept of the person that is remembered. Okay, so again, in order to utilize this model and understand this model, you have to get the terms correct. So again, it is critically important to understand that the historical person is the idea, a composite thought form built from the memories of society. So, if you remember, if you understand, if you're using the term historical person correctly, meaning not the flesh and blood person, but the thought form born from the memories, the concept of the person, then sure, yeah, generally speaking, that is what becomes deified. We said this at the beginning of the video. However, what you're probably really meaning to ask is, does the forensic person, the mind that inhabited a flesh and blood body, become the deity? That's probably what you meant to ask. And so that changes depending on different religious traditions. The answer to that question changes. Read very clearly on the screen, not all Japanese people believe the same thing. If you learn anything from this video, please at least try to learn that. There is no singular, all-encompassing Japanese belief system. There's so many different belief systems with different variations. If nothing else, at least walk away with that understanding. Okay, so for some types of people that follow Shinto. Now again, I won't go into this in detail. Watch my previous videos. I'm very critical of Shinto. People misunderstand Shinto. Shinto was not a religion until the late 1700s. Prior to that, it was an amorphous collection of indigenous beliefs mixed with Chinese Taoism. But we won't go there. We'll just sort of take the generic understanding of Shinto, which is not historically correct, but the generic understanding of Shinto. And working with that understanding of Shinto, we can say, for some types of Shinto, the mind of the forensic person does in fact become the deity. However, for some types of Shinto, that is not true. So for some types of Shinto, the consciousness of the forensic person becomes the deity. And in some versions of Shinto, it's the historical memory that becomes the deity. For most Buddhism, no, the mind reincarnates. So generally speaking, the mind that inhabited the forensic person reincarnates who knows where. And it's the memory of the person that is deified. However, in Buddhism, because a human being can die and reincarnate as a god. There's a possibility, albeit a very small probability, that possibly the person's reincarnation was that of a deity, and so maybe, just maybe, with a very low level of probability, maybe, the forensic person's mind reincarnated as the deity. However, in general, it is not held that the forensic person mind becomes or arises as the deity. But again, for some variations of belief, they hold that as the standard. So again, multiple different answers to the question. Furthermore, you may ask, isn't this a big difference? Yes, you're correct. This is a big difference. Oddly enough, though, in the final product, it makes very little difference. So, in terms of view and belief, it is very different. These different viewpoints, these different religious traditions have a different foundational explanation. But, ironically, when it comes down to day-to-day or sort of the final product, you go to the shrine, you bow to the shrine, you pay some respect at the shrine. You know, a lot of the functionality is the same regardless of the belief that you hold. So the belief that you hold will ultimately, for you, the individual, your private experience, the belief is going to have a profound difference. But from a societal functional perspective, it doesn't make a whole lot of difference, because functionally things are done the same. It's just the internal belief is different. Also, you should at this moment take note that these differences in views are exactly what spawns all the various branches of various traditions, different groups supporting different concepts regarding these types of questions. There's countless documents have been written by Japanese philosophers throughout history attempting to answer and then support and defend their various answers and views based on these questions. Okay, so again, this is because not all Japanese people believe the same thing. There is a great variety in the beliefs. Functionally, it may look very similar on the outside, but internally, there's a great variety of the beliefs. And so this is a very good example of the variations and variety of such beliefs, and why you should not believe that Japanese people have a unified belief system. So now let's get very specific and let's use some kind of Tada Genji example. And so the best example that comes to my mind is Kusunoki Masashige. So this is a Tada Genji teaching. This is also Kusunoki Ryu teaching. And this is the kind of teaching that comes deep in not the war technique sections of Kusunoki Ryu, but when you get into the commentaries, into the sort of the spiritual sections and the commentaries to the spiritual sections, you get into stuff like this. For example, in the commentary to the Niso Daigo, it actually does not talk about the Niso Daigo very much. What it talks about is stuff like this. So basically, the Niso Daigo commentary basically is not an extension of how to use Niso Daigo. It is basically a commentary on how Kusunoki Masashige came up with the Niso Daigo. Anyway, long story short, my point is this is not something that I'm making up. This discussion is found in the Kusunoki Ryu commentaries. So now that you can know that, let's move forward with this. So, forensic Kusunoki Masashige, he was a human being. He was a mind animating a flesh and blood body. He lived a very specific life in a very specific place and time, and then when he died, his mind reincarnated. That's it. Can't interact with him unless you were alive at the same time. Historical Kusunoki Masashige is an idea, a concept, that is the sum total of all the memories and records of the activities of forensic Kusunoki Masashige. So historical Masashige is not the same thing as forensic Masashige. You can interact with historical Masashige at any time by learning the history. But you can never interact with forensic Masashige because he's dead and gone, right? Then you have deity Masashige. This is when the historical Masashige becomes so inspiring to you. And again, when I say historical Masashige, I don't mean the flesh and blood person. I mean the idea of the sum total of the memories of the forensic Masashige. So the historical Masashige, the thought form Masashige, becomes so inspiring to you that this thought or this idea is so powerful that it can actually impact and change your life. It becomes an energy that guides and protects you. This is the deified Masashige. So I already know your question. So your question, you're going right back to this question of, is the mind of the forensic Masashige at all involved in this deification? And again, this changes on how you view it. So in orange, purple, and blue, we've got three different viewpoints. So some people can believe that Masashige, the forensic Masashige, reincarnated as the deity Masashige. So this is when you believe that the mind that played the character of Masashige in this world reincarnated as a deity. Then in that case you believe that the mind that inhabited the body is now the mind that is the deity. The other belief system is that Masashige was a bodhisattva. So some Kusunoki Ryu students, for example, believe that Masashige was a bodhisattva. And then there's a group of the people that believe Masashige was a bodhisattva, there is a subgroup that believes that Masashige was a reincarnation of Prince Shotoku. So they believe Prince Shotoku was a bodhisattva and that he reincarnated as Masashige. Same mind stream. In that case, you believe that Masashige was always a deity because he was always a bodhisattva. So in this case, you are never actually praising forensic Masashige, quote unquote normal human Masashige, because he was actually a bodhisattva the entire time. So in that case, you're praising the bodhisattva that displayed themselves as Prince Shotoku and then as Masashige. So in that case, Masashige is just a one form, one expression of a great bodhisattva, in which case he was already a deity. And then in the blue, we have the belief that forensic Masashige died and his consciousness reincarnated who knows where. It doesn't matter. Because in this belief, it doesn't matter where the forensic Masashige reincarnated. It doesn't matter. Because what you are following is, you are following the historical thought form's deification process. So in this case, you understand that the deity is the historical thought form, and then you empower this thought form with so much of your own energy and tendencies. So, and because you find so much inspiration from it, it's like a mirror reflecting your own power back to you. It's like you have potential and inspiration and motivation that you can't really seem to activate on your own. So you project it outward to the deified form of the historical Masashige. And the historical Masashige is thus imbued with so much of your chi and your energy that it becomes a deity. And then like a mirror reflects it back to you and inspires you and motivates you and empowers you. So hopefully with this example of Kusunoki Masashige, you can see how this system can play out so differently based on variations in the belief. And this same thing works for pretty much any deity. For example, in my next video, I'm going to show you a shrine in which Toyotomi Hideyoshi is deified. Right? So in my next video, I'm going to take you around a particular area of Japan I was recently at. I took some photographs and stuff, and I'm going to go through a couple of different places, show you the photos, explain what's going on, etc., etc. Should be a fun video. But in that video, I'm going to show you a shrine where Hideyoshi is deified, right? But depending on the fundamental approach, right, it has different beliefs or experiences. Maybe Hideyoshi arose as a god. Maybe the forensic Hideyoshi's mind reincarnated as a deity and lives in that shrine. Maybe. Or maybe the shrine just enshrines the idea of Hideyoshi, or the historical Hideyoshi, right? The thought form of Hideyoshi. Or maybe just the idea of Hideyoshi could be so important to you that like a mirror, it reflects your inner power back to you. And seemingly, as like an external deity, it helps inspire and awaken and clear obstacles to your own motivation and abilities. Maybe. Alright, so that's the end of this video. Hopefully this video makes sense. You can feel free to leave questions, comments, concerns in the comment section. But I'm going to go ahead and end the video now. So hopefully this video inspires you. Take care.